Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Congdon. I'm the Executive Deputy of the Department of Public Service and the Chair of the Indian Point Decommissioning Oversight Board. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the DOB. Tom Kaczmarek, do you want to just give us a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. We'll just go quickly through the list here. Chair Congdon.
Present.
John Sipos.
Here.
Senator Harcum.
Here via Zoom.
Thank you, Senator. Assemblywoman Levenberg.
I'm here.
Cindy Costello. You may be muted, Cindy.
Just a reminder for everyone at the table to speak into the mic.
I'm here.
Kelly Turturro.
Here.
Rachel Adler. Linda Malave.
Present.
Present.
Mark Massaroni. Jennifer Waka.
Present.
Elise Peterson.
Present.
Joe Leary.
Here.
David Lockbaum.
Present via Zoom.
Richard Webster.
Yep, here.
Mayor Knickerbocker.
Present.
Superintendent, I don't see it. Let's see here. We have Rich Becker.
Here.
Susan Spear.
Here.
Do we have legislator Ulay on the line? Or legislator Smith? Superintendent Trombley, are you on the line? Okay, thank you. Before I turn it back over to Chair Congdon, just a few brief reminders to our panelists and participants to promote a smooth meeting. To our in-person board members and guest presenters, please speak into the mic and to ensure your comments are clearly heard and accurately recorded. Also, please state your name. That will help our court reporter. To our panelists joining by Zoom, please keep your mics muted unless you are speaking, and make sure that you unmute them before you start to speak. To our Zoom participants, please reserve the chat feature for reporting technical issues to our AV team. Only questions that are captured in the Q&A are going to be able to be saved and reviewed. Finally, all speakers tonight, again, just please remember one more time, use your mics and state your names. Thank you so much. Tom?
Thank you, Tom. And thanks to Tom Kaczmarek, our Executive Director, for all the work he does to put these meetings on. Tonight would not be possible without Tom's work. Thank you also to Supervisor Becker and Jim Creighton, the Deputy Supervisor, Town of Cortland, for hosting us tonight. And thanks to everyone on the DOB for your continued engagement and for the audience and general public's continued engagement as well. The agenda for this evening is to go over the status of projects that were funded through the Entergy settlement. This was the $15 million in community benefit funds that the state and other litigants secured as part of a settlement for the closure of Indian Point. Then we will turn to our typical agenda items, another update by the state in terms of the oversight activities. And we'll turn it to Holtec for some operational updates at the site, and then we'll have our public statement hearing. With that, I want to turn it back to Tom Kaczmarek to start us off with an update on the settlement award project status.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. So I'm going to start off with updates to 4 of the 6 projects that received settlement awards over the last several years. Unfortunately, the awardees were not able to join tonight, but they asked me to provide a brief update in their stead. So first, Teamsters Local 456. Some of you may recall they received funding for a training simulator This is for CDL drivers. They still continue to use this. It seems to have good success locally, including with former employees of Indian Point. They noted that an additional 13 were trained or completed training this year, and that's in addition to 1 or 2 dozen who have completed it in the years prior. For plumbers and steam fitters, Local 21, there's trainings that have been developed for semiconductor microchip manufacturing and the tech innovation industry. These are targeting former Indian Point employees, but are open to all of their members. There's a series of courses from beginner through expert and then ultimately certification. So there's already 95 that are in training or have completed the training so far, and the program's been active for just over a year. Historic Hudson Valley, they're working on the Van Cortlandt Manor Gateway project. Some of you may recall there's a major event around Halloween that they host, and they received funding to increase the resilience of some of the higher traffic areas there. They did need to adjust their scope slightly to fit within their budgetary constraints, but their project has been approved by DOT. They plan to initiate construction next month. The Hudson River Foundation continues the biological monitoring in the Hudson River that was present while Indian Point was operational. They've continued that work, and they noted that the Carey Institute was recently secured to launch 3 years of lower food web sampling beginning next year. So that's 2025 through 2028. With that, I know that we do have members of the DOB who want to provide slightly more in-depth updates on the settlement awards they received. First, I'd like to turn it to George Palmer, who's the engineer with the Village of Buchanan, to present an update for the village.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, board members. Good evening. My name is George Palmer. I'm the village engineer, Village of Buchanan. And we've been working with the state for a number of years in the town of Cortland on upgrading the sewage treatment plant for the Village of Buchanan, which also benefits the town of Cortland. And as shown in the slide, is that the slide? Yes. We've applied for a number of grants over the past few years. We did receive a grant for $1.62 million. In 2021, we received a grant for $2.73 million this past month, and that leaves us, from our overall budget, that gives us around $4 million, a little over $4 million, and our overall project cost was $12.16 million, and that's broken down into 2 phases. You see in the slide it says 2 phases, which we have to do one side of our treatment plant, and then we have to do the other side of our treatment plant. So it is broken down, but both of them have to be done at the same time. And as part of this project as well is the settlement fund, which is the $6.75 million. So looking at our overall costs for our projects with the $6.75 million, we still would need about $1.06 million, and we are waiting for the WQIP grant, which I understand is going to be announced this month, and hopefully we'll get that balance of money. So that's where we're at status with the money. The next issue is the process. So there's 16 or 17 bullet items that we've highlighted, and I'm not going to go.
Please.
Yeah. I'm not going to go through each one of the bullets, but this is to let you know there is a process. We do have to finalize our design. We do have to finalize our permitting process with the DOH, Westchester County DOH, and with the DEC, and then we have to prepare bid documents, and then once we go through that whole bid process, site walkthroughs, bidders, make recommendations, so forth. then we get to start construction. So I was asked tonight where we start with starting. So if all goes well, so I did mention there's the permitting portion of this. That's always an unknown, but if all went well, first or second quarter of next year, we could be shoveling ground. So at the earliest. So that's what we're looking at. And that's what we have for you tonight.
George, thank you very much for the update. Supervisor Becker or
Yeah, I'd
any
like
of the
to
DOB
say a
members
few
have
words.
any questions or comments?
When the money was announced, the $15 million, the Village of Buchanan, because it was the host community and was in dire need of monies, went after this aggressively. Because the plant was built in the early 1960s, the tanks are original cement structures, so they're 60-plus years old. Excuse me. Over the years, we have done repairs and replacements, and we're still using the original technology from the 60s, which is surface aeration. So we're looking to upgrade to the new technology. It's diffused bubble. So we're talking quite an old system. And one thing I could say for George Palmer, he has been our engineer for over 30 years. He is probably the most knowledgeable and has the plant running. You know, we have, employees there, but George is really on top of the plant, and it runs well with George, but this is the time now to upgrade the technology. We were very fortunate to get a lot of these grants, and because otherwise the village would not be able to bond that amount of money to get this done. The village board has made an agreement with the town of Cortland, an intermunicipal agreement, and they will be allowed to connect into our sewer treatment plant, but the key here is we have to upgrade our plant before we can take any new effluent, shall I say?
Yes.
And just as an overview too, it was, we had a DEC consent order, and and George, I'd like you to speak to that. It's the 5th year, I believe now, and we are almost finished with that consent order. So this is very important to the Village of Buchanan. It's important for the future of the village, future economic, and I'm just very, very grateful that I am still on the board and I can see this to its final stage, because this all started in 2017. So this has been a long road, and I'm very grateful to see that sometime next year, hopefully in the spring, that we can start the construction of this. George, would you like to continue with the DEC too?
Sure. You
Just
talk-
jump in for 1 second. The mayor and I have been speaking, and my town board is supportive. The 6.75 million was really originally over 7. Tom and I spoke with the mayor, and we agreed that $250,000 would go for the unions for training. And so that brought it down to 6.75. And of that, I told Mayor Knickerbocker that our town board was supportive, given, even though it's an IMA and the intermunicipal agreement, and the money was supposed to be shared between Buchanan and Cortland. Buchanan is Cortland. It's part of Cortland. So we were very happy and willing to give all of that money to Buchanan to expand their plant, because not only will that allow it to be brought into full compliance and expanded, but it allows Cortland to connect into it, which is very important to the neighboring communities like Montrose. So this is going to be a win-win when this happens.
And Supervisor, it's much appreciated. Those monies, like I said, are really needed, and it's good that the town and the village can work together.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, you did mention we're coming to the end of a consent in a recent conference call. It was, the DEC was looking favorably on our progress that we've made over the last 5 years with our inflow and our infiltration and our compliance. So I think we're in a good place to have this upgrade and move into the future.
Well, this is a really positive update and really appreciate the progress that's being made. You know, when we first awarded the 6.75 as part of the grant agreement, we requested that the town and the village apply for funds they were eligible for. And it's really great to see that those applications are bearing some fruit and that the awards were made, and to see that we're almost entirely funded, you know, to meet the need is pretty astounding. You know, where we were, I think, prior to the grant awards being made, you know, the village had been, you know, rightly expressing concern about the loss of tax revenue with the plant's closure, but then coupling that with the fact that there was this large expense that would need to be incurred to comply with the consent order, it was a no-brainer to make some of the settlement funds available for this purpose. And it's having the desired effect of actually attracting additional grant monies. And just really want to commend both the village and the town for the cooperative work that you're doing. And it's exciting to think as well that there's some potential economic development coming that can tie into the upgraded sewage treatment plant, which will replace some of the lost tax revenue. So again, you know, when we first announced the closure, there's a lot of economic concerns in the community. There still are, for sure, but this is good progress. So congratulations. We were next going to be hearing an update from the school superintendent, Michael Tremblay, who's not yet arrived. If he does arrive, we can turn back to this portion of the presentation, but for now, why don't we fast forward a few slides to the state oversight updates, unless there are further questions for the project award updates. No? Okay. So on this, I will turn it over to John Sipos to begin. You got the mic?
Yes, thanks, Tom. I'm going to just speak briefly from an enforcement and investigation perspective. As we do at each of these meetings, we report on whether or not there have been any tips or concerns expressed by the hotline. And since the last meeting, there have been no reports to our hotline. So I want to share that with the community. And I'm going to turn it over now to Cliff Chapin, who is the state's resident inspector here at the site, to walk through other developments that have occurred since we were last here.
Thank you, John. Okay, so Holtec continues to maintain 4 of the Reuter-Stokes radiation monitors in service. These monitors are the 4 closest monitors to the Buchanan-Verplanck Elementary School. The monitors continue to show stable background radiation levels as expected. Next slide. Since the last DOB, Holtec has not received any additional non-cited violations or greater from the NRC. Associated with a violation discussed at the last DOB meeting where Holtec had utilized some employee agreements with improper wording, Holtec has implemented the corrective actions at Indian Point, which included updating their separation documents, additional training for current employees, and notification of former employees of their rights associated with raising safety concerns to the NRC. Next. Holtec has continued to hold monthly project meetings in accordance with the joint proposal. These meetings continue to be attended by New York State Department of Public Service, Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Attorney General's Office. As part of the walkdowns that I perform on the site, I recently walked down the Unit 1 systems that continuously discharge groundwater leakage, and I participated in a recent NRC on-site inspection associated with effluent monitoring. Next slide. Associated with decommissioning trust fund balances, and in accordance with timelines established in the joint proposal, multiple state agencies have been a part of meetings with Holtec to review the trust fund balances. Holtec continues to be in compliance with its minimum trust fund balance obligations. The next publicly available accounting of the Indian Point's trust fund balances are due in April of 2025. Next slide. State regulators and agencies also attended tabletop emergency exercises that included local municipalities and EMS personnel. The first exercise was held at Indian Point and involved a security event that allowed all participants to discuss their expected responses and required notifications. Next slide. The second exercise was hosted by Enbridge. It also included state and local responders, Indian Point personnel, and included a Hendrick Hudson school representative. The scenario involved a simulated gas line rupture with a resulting fire on the 42-inch pipeline and allowed participants to coordinate and collaboratively discuss resources and response considerations. I'll now turn over to Kelly Turturro.
Did you want to pause for questions?
Sure, we can pause for questions. Does anyone have any questions for the DPS oversight updates?
Quick one, Rich, you mentioned the Unit 1 systems that deal with groundwater leakage. Can you just tell me a bit more about those?
Can you speak directly into the mic, Richard, please? Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned the Unit 1 systems that deal with groundwater leakage, I think. Could you just tell us a bit more about those?
What would you like to know? I mean, they are the systems that the groundwater leakage into Unit 1 containment building, and they do have some radioactivity associated with the plume from the previous spent fuel pool leaks. And so in the case of one of the systems, it's direct discharge, and the other system, there is some processing of the water before it's discharged.
Okay, so the water comes into the reactor, doesn't go out, right? Is that the first thing?
It's coming into the containment area.
Right.
Correct.
And then, and it's because you have the groundwater plume, you're within the groundwater plume where there's radioactive radionuclides, so therefore, how do you discharge it? You said one of it is a direct discharge. Where does it directly discharge to?
To the Hudson River. It goes into the outfall associated with surface water flow that's going through the plant, and goes into the discharge at the plant.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Cliff? Okay, Kelly.
Thank you. So, to begin with, I'll start with DEC's work under the consent order, the remedial investigation scoping work plan, and remedial investigation work plans. As I've mentioned in the past, Holtec has submitted a remedial investigation work plan to DEC for what's known as AOC 118, which is the Lafarge area. That work plan was approved by DEC in October of 2023. Holtec commenced and completed field work in May of 2024, and they have submitted, at the end of August 2024, they submitted a remedial investigation report to DEC for that area. That report is currently under review. No other remedial investigation work plans have been submitted to DEC for other areas of the site. Next slide, please. As I've mentioned in the past, the two speedies permits for the main facility governing discharges from the main facility as well as stormwater discharges from the Unit 2 transformer. DEC has reviewed all the permit application material and is working to develop a draft speedies permit and fact sheet. When that is complete, we will be able to notice that for public review and comment. Next slide. And we also continue to oversee the closure and assessment of all tanks associated with the major oil storage facility license on the site. And next slide. And then I wanted to bring up and let everybody know about regulations that DEC has recently proposed to be amended under our Part 601 and 602. This governs water withdrawal permitting, report, and registration. There are a variety of changes that DEC has proposed for these regulatory changes, but the reason why I wanted to bring it up tonight was because most relevant to the Indian Point facility is that we are proposing to expand the saline waters exemption. So currently, withdrawals from the Atlantic Ocean and Long Island Sound do not need water withdrawal permits. So what this regulatory change proposes is the exemption would be expanded to the waters of the lower Hudson River. So essentially, the exemption would stop at the northern border of Westchester County and Rockland County. This would allow consistency with the current exemption, where DEC has proposed to include these waters that are directly influenced by the Atlantic Ocean. So while this will affect the Indian Point facility in the short term, the facility will also not require a water withdrawal permit in the near future, as they decommission the facility, they will no longer be withdrawing water from the Hudson River. So next steps, I think you can go to the next slide, Tom, thank you. So we noticed these regulations for public comment in October of this year. Since we haven't had a DOB meeting since then that I could present this, I have asked that the current comment period that runs through December 16th, 2024 be extended. And DEC will be extending that public comment period until the end of January so that everybody has the opportunity to review the draft changes to the Part 601 and 602 water withdrawal regulations and be able to provide DEC comments. That's what the comment period is for. We want to hear your input. And thank you. So these changes will be noticed, and everything that DEC does as far as permit applications, regulatory provisions, you can find that information in DEC's Environmental Notice Bulletin. It is published every Wednesday. You can find it online. For purposes of the water withdrawal regs, we can also include a link on the Indian Point Decommissioning Oversight Board website as well.
Great. Thank you, Kelly, very much. I think we have a question online from Senator Harkam.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you very much, Kelly, for your presentation, as always. On the this latest subject that you just discussed, couple questions, like why now? Why do this now? Especially if in their decommissioning process they're drawing less and less water. Is there a need to change? Ask because what could possibly be on this site or other sites in the Hudson that could withdraw unlimited amounts of water and not need a permit. I'm just trying to think like where the public's mind goes when they hear something like this in a site very specific like this.
Thanks for your question, Senator. The impetus in changing these regulations is not about Indian Point. While it affects the Indian Point facility, there are a variety of changes that DEC is making in the water withdrawal regulations as a whole. While Indian Point will be affected by one aspect of the regulations, it wasn't why we're changing the regulations. We have a variety of changes that we're making across the board, whether it be definitions or as I mentioned, exempting some of these facilities from a water withdrawal permit.
Is there any consideration, or I certainly could put this enter into public comments during appropriate time, but any thought to moving forward with your other changes, but exempting the Indian Point area until that decommissioning is complete? And I say that again, just because, you know, in your thoroughness, you add 1 and 1 and get 2. Sometimes the public adds 1 and 1 and gets 5. And, you know, wondering, all right, what could possibly go on that site that could use unlimited water? And we just want to provide some sort of reassurance and for the public in that regard.
So, Senator, as you mentioned, I would encourage that you to submit that comment, and DEC will look at those comments, take that under consideration as we are developing the final regulations. So please share that with us in public comments.
Kelly, I don't want to put you on the spot, but just for helping clarify the purpose of water withdrawal permits and the environmental rationale for why DEC has such programs in place with permitting requirements. Like, there's a difference, right, in terms of the quantity of water from, say, a lake or a smaller water body versus an ocean body. And there are concerns about availability of water, so that's one of the environmental interests in why DEC would regulate this. And then, in addition, with such a water withdrawal, then there are also environmental issues that DEC reviews with respect to aquatic habitat and impacts to, fish and other things, right? And so, with respect to Indian Point, and Richard is here from Riverkeeper, and there's been, long history here of litigation, and the DEC was really, pushing for closed cycle cooling at Indian Point when it was operating, right? That was related, but can you talk a little bit about the environmental purpose behind sort of what it means for these water intakes? Maybe that helps put things in perspective for the senator and others who are curious about what this means.
Certainly, thanks for the question, Tom. I do want to say that I have an engineer who runs our water withdrawal program on the line as well. He has joined virtually. John Hawk, I'll take the question, and if you wanted to jump in on anything, please feel free to.
Sure thing.
So in terms of the purpose of the water withdrawal regulations, DEC has in place a requirement that if anyone is withdrawing more than 100,000 gallons per day, they are required to have a water withdrawal permit. That is so that DEC can regulate, as you said, Tom, the quantities of water that are withdrawn to ensure that we are protecting the environment. What we've done in the regulations is to say that the Atlantic Ocean, the Long Island Sound have a tremendous amount of water, and they are exempted from requiring a water withdrawal permit. Because the Hudson River is tidally influenced, and because it is so close to the Atlantic Ocean near Westchester and Rockland County, we are expanding that exemption to that area. Secondly, in terms of the impact to fish in the river. So that aspect of the jurisdiction for DEC is regulated under our SPEEDIES process. We don't regulate that, I don't want to say we don't regulate it through water withdrawal, but we include conditions in our SPEEDIES permit to ensure that there are protections for, the terminology is impingement and entrainment. And those protections are included in SPEEDIES permits for all facilities that may be withdrawing water and causing impingement and entrainment. So that will remain in the Indian Point SPEEDIES permit.
Thank you. And any future uses, whether it's Indian Point or otherwise, impingement and other impacts would be considered as part of any kind of speedies.
Yes, and DEC has a policy in place that requires best technology available, which requires closed cycle cooling. So any new facility would be required to have closed cycle cooling. If I can just pause, I just want to double check with John to make sure he doesn't have anything to add. John?
Kelly, I think you covered it really well, and I'll try not to be redundant here. But, as you stated, the primary objective of a water withdrawal permit is really to assess the impacts on water availability from large capacity water withdrawals, to assess environmental impacts related to those withdrawals, and potential impacts to nearby users. As Kelly had indicated, in terms of water quantity, I would say that's not necessarily a concern here due to the hydrologic connection to the Atlantic Ocean. But when it comes to environmental impacts, the top ones that come to mind for me for power generation facilities and cooling water facilities are fish entrapment and entrainment and thermal discharge differentials. And as Kelly stated, those are both regulated through speedies permits and the best technology available conditions within those speedies permits. And I also like to make a note that most of these facilities that would be impacted by this change in rulemaking do return a lot of their flows to the source water through part of the cooling process, where consumptive uses can vary, as in, uses of water that are lost through evaporation, incorporation into product, etc. But in most cases, a bulk of the water is returned to the source water body.
Thank you, John. Richard Webster, I'm sorry, Danny, I'll get to your question in a second. I just want to make sure that the substance of what Kelly presented is understood. In Riverkeeper's litigation, pertaining to Indian Point prior to closure, wasn't the major interest that you were seeking to protect was the aquatic life?
Right. Well, there's two aspects. There's
The impingement and infringement?
Right, there's the impingement and entrainment, and then there's the thermal...
Can you speak into the mic, please?
There's the impingement and the entrainment, and then there's also the thermal discharge.
In the thermal discharge,
Yeah.
right.
And by the way, it wasn't just Indian Point. We litigated a series of power plants up and down the Hudson. Indian Point was not special in that regard. It had a similar outdated cooling system to many other plants. But I still, Kelly, I have a couple of questions for you. One is, I haven't quite understood why, presumably when you first made this rule, you decided not to extend this exemption, or whatever you want to call it, up the Hudson, and now you are. So I haven't quite understood why that is. And the second question is, if you had a consumptive use, like say you had a desal plant, how would you regulate impingement and entrainment then?
So I'm going to hop in while Kelly is preparing, I think, for the first part, but the second part is purely hypothetical. There is no desal plant here.
I think one was proposed, John, so it's not beyond the wit of man that someone
I think it was about a decade ago, and it was not finalized.
Correct.
So I'm going to turn it back to Kelly.
Still on the boards, the PSC can turn around and say yes to it again. But it's not.
So John, could you jump in on the history of the water withdrawal regs? What Richard's question is originally, why did we exempt the withdrawals from the Atlantic Ocean and the Long Island Sound?
Right, but not the estuarine Hudson.
And not the Hudson?
I do apologize. I don't have an answer to that. That was a bit before my time at the department. But, we're looking through these regulatory changes through the lens of, use and experience. The last time these regs were updated was 2013, when they became applicable to non-public facilities, such as Indian Point, and for Long Island wells, 1986. So, we've been working with these regulations for a bit over a decade at this point, and this was one that jumped out to our team as a logical exemption to make if we're, already exempting withdrawals from the Atlantic Ocean and Long Island Sound. So I do apologize, I don't know the history about why the lower Hudson and estuarine waters were originally not included, but that is what we are seeking to do with this rulemaking.
Hi, Tom Kazmarek, just a quick reminder, please state your name before you speak. It'll help our court reporter.
And Assemblymember Levenberg has a question, and I can turn it back to you in a moment.
Thank you so much, Tom. My name is Dana Levenberg, and I'm an Assembly member. Thank you. I have just really kind of a follow-up to Pete's question, which is why now? And I know John Hawk tried to respond to that just now, but it's not clear to me that there is anything driving this except for you were looking at it and you thought, oh, this makes sense. From the perspective of an ocean versus a river, I don't understand how it makes sense, so love to have some clarification. I understand that, there's water from the Atlantic that makes its way into the Hudson, but it's a tributary, it's not an ocean, so just very curious about that, and obviously we can include this in the comments, again, back to DEC, and I'm grateful for the extension of the timeline, but would like to understand that better, and again, why now?
As we've heard many times, some remember from members of the public and from our discussions, the Hudson River is tidal all the way up to the Troy Dam.
It's not saline.
I'm just
Not
saying
saline
it's a
all the way to the
river.
Troy Dam.
It's a river versus an ocean. That's my point.
It's brackish all the way up to the Troy.
Hardly.
I'll let DEC speak more to that, but that's what we've been talking about for many
It's
meetings.
a river that flows both ways.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, what we're looking at is the area that's influenced by the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean flows into the Hudson River, and that's why we're looking at the fact that the Atlantic Ocean is flowing into the Hudson River and have determined that that's where we would draw the line. John, could you add anything else to that?
Yeah, and in terms of why now, these discussions surrounding the proposed amendments to Part 601 and 602 started 4 years ago at this point. This is something that has been in the works for a long time, and this singular exemption, I'll admit, was not the driver for the regulatory revisions. There were some other drivers there related to other industry groups and regulated communities, but while we had this opportunity, this once-in-a-decade opportunity to open the regs up, we really went back to basics. What are we trying to regulate here? What are our objectives as a regulatory program? And it goes back to, the description Kelly gave earlier. What's our primary purpose here? We're looking to regulate water quantity. So we're looking into all issues where there are quantity concerns. And we went back, we looked at this exemption for the Atlantic Ocean and Long Island Sound, and then we, through our analysis, went through, looked at facilities that are withdrawing from water on the Hudson River, Lower Hudson, East River, Arthur Kill, etc. How do these facilities operate? How much water are they returning to the river? And we determined that really there are no quantity concerns related to withdrawals at these facilities. And similarly, when we do have environmental concerns, they are covered under other DEC permitting programs.
Yes, Superintendent Trombley, by the way, welcome, and also welcome to Legislator Ely.
So I apologize for my tardiness. Michael Trombley, Superintendent of Schools, Hendrick Hudson Central School District. And I share this purely just because, not from an opinion-based, but purely fact-based, just to show my students that their geography standards do come alive. I think New York State geography fact teaches us that the Saguenay Reservoir in the river, the tributary, helps control the saline, the salt water coming up the Hudson. So that's just fact to show the kids that the facts do play a part.
Thank you.
Not only just on Jeopardy.
Susan Spear?
Thank you. So I guess I'd like to understand sort of the immediate impact as well as the longer-term impact. Do we know what volume of water Indian Point withdraws for decommissioning purposes? I mean, obviously, it's not the same as when they were using it for cooling purposes, but I wonder for decommissioning construction purposes, is there a volume that we know of?
So what I can share is the numbers that we have. While they were operating, the facility withdrew approximately 2 billion gallons per day. Last year, the numbers were approximately 17 million gallons per day.
Thank you. So is there not like a value in just having the data as to how much water is being withdrawn generally from Westchester and Rockland? It seems to me like there's just a value in having the information about how much water is being withdrawn. And it seems like you would lose that with this exemption. And I would ask, what's the timeline for the exemption? Would it be immediate once the regulations are promulgated, the waiver? I'm not sure I know the difference between how a regulation is promulgated versus a waiver or an exemption. So what would be the timeline for an exemption? I assume an exemption happens faster than a regulation.
I'm not sure I understand your question, but what I think you're asking, or what I think you're interpreting, is that DEC would issue a specific exemption for each facility? Is that what you're thinking?
No, I'm just trying to ascertain if you could give us a sense of what would be the timeline if you did issue the waiver.
So the timeline would be when the regulations were adopted. You're asking about the timeline for the regulation adoption. So we're going through the public comment period now. As I mentioned, we will be extending the public comment period until late January. Then we would look at all the public comments that came in, determine if any changes to our proposed regulations need to be made, and then finalize the regulations. So that could take, John, I don't want to bind you to anything. It could take 6 months. Sometime in 2025, I would say, would be our goal. But it all depends on how many public comments we get. It depends on what comes in.
Can I just make one last observation? I mean, the observation that the current withdrawals are fine and we don't have a problem could be an indication that the current regulatory regime is working. And so it doesn't seem to me that that's a driver to change the regulatory regime.
I don't understand what you mean by the current withdrawals are fine.
In other words, you currently have a number of permittees, right, with withdrawal permits. And their total withdrawals are not causing any problems. Is that right?
I don't understand your question.
There are several permittees up the river.
There are several
that are
permittees
within this geographic area that we're talking about exempting.
Right. And none of those, I haven't heard that there's a problem with obtaining a permit or with these permittees complying with their permits. And so if we don't have a problem, why are we fixing it?
I see. Well, submit that to us in comments.
Okay. And Senator Harkin had a follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. And John, thank you for joining the group tonight and adding your perspective and your expertise. Quick follow-up, and along the lines of what Richard was saying, earlier you said, John, that you looked at other facilities up and down the Hudson. How many other facilities are impacted, or to Richard's question, are drawing water along the Hudson? And can you give us, other than Indian Point, how many? And can you give us some examples so we know of the types of facilities you're talking about?
Yes, thank you, Senator. So in DC Region 3, so the approximate area in the lower Hudson River, I think we had 4 or 5 facilities withdrawing from the Hudson. 2 of them were mining facilities, and 3 of them, I believe, were power gen. Then down in DC Region 2 in New York City, it was fewer than 10 facilities, with a couple of those being power gen facilities.
So last question, just because Richard and I were in a back and forth, just to set the record straight. You're only talking about applying this regulatory change to the saline waters, which goes how far north up the river? To just the northern boundaries of Westchester, Rockland?
Correct.
Right, and it is tidal, the river is tidal all the way up to the Troy Dam, correct?
Yes, it is.
Right, okay, just for the record.
It's just the salinity gets lower and lower.
Right.
And so, there's a push. The water, that incoming tide pushes fresh water up, but the saline water doesn't get all the way up.
And they're only talking about the saline waters, which is to answer Assemblymember Levenberg's question, why the river? This is the saline portion of the river, which is influenced by the Atlantic Ocean. Right?
But it's still a river. Correct.
Okay.
Not an ocean.
All right.
Just to be clear.
So now that we've been joined by Superintendent Trombley, I want to turn back to the school presentation, if that's okay, Superintendent?
Thank you, Tom. Again, I apologize for being tardy. So I've been asked to provide an update as to how the Hendrick Hudson Central School District is using its settlement funds to provide for air monitor quality at the Buchanan-Verplanck Elementary School. So if we can go to the next slide. This is what, as a school district who serves children, this is what we do every day. We ground ourselves in a mission. And part of this presentation, it would be remiss if I didn't say that we have experienced significant challenges in meeting and living out this mission for our children since the closure of the Indian Point power plant. Next slide, please. When deciding how to approach this update, I could just stop right here, bless you, because when being asked how we are using the funds, it's to help our children. That's everything we do as a school district. That's our existence. We do not exist as a school district without children. That is all we do. We service children. The men and women working in our school districts, that is their only mission, and that is how we would use any funds that we receive. Before I begin the content of my presentation, I'd like to take a moment to read a statement, a joint statement that's signed by not only myself, but the Hendrick Hudson Central School District Board of Education, the Hendrick Hudson Education Foundation, which is our teachers union, our Hendrick Hudson District Administrators Association, which is our administrators union, also our Hendrick Hudson Educational Secretaries Association, the Hendrick Hudson PTA Advocacy Committee, the Hendrick Hudson Elementary PTA Executive Board, the Hendrick Hudson Blue Mountain Middle School Executive Board, the Hendrick Hudson High School PTSA Executive Board, and our Special Education Executive Board. Because we all do care about the children that you see on the screen and every single child in the school district. For decades, our community has borne the brunt of the dangers of having the Indian Point nuclear power plant in our backyard. It has been almost 8 years since Entergy announced the plant's closure, and 3 years since the reactor is powered down. However, the repercussions from the closing continue to ripple throughout the community and the region. The Hendrick Hudson Central School District provides a myriad of programs and services to reach all sectors of our student population and their families, and it is the largest employer in our area. The loss of nearly 1/3 of our overall revenue stream endangers everything for which we strive, including the children you see on the screen there. The federal government has no realistic plans to deal with the spent fuels sitting on the asphyxie pad, so our community is tasked with storing them, tax-free, which delays our ability to reuse the land. It is possible that we may never be able to use this land for other purposes, given the lack of a solution for nuclear waste, transport, and storage. Furthermore, we have tritiated water in the spent fuel pods and soil contamination on the property. A massive revenue-generating property is now left inert, but the danger it holds for our community still remain. We are grateful for the $60 million in relief funding that has been earmarked thus far, but it is not sufficient. The money paid out by the Cessation Mitigation Fund, or CMF, over its qualifying period of 8 years post-closure is equivalent to just 2 years of Indian Point pilot revenue for our school district. The timeline of the CMF is woefully inadequate, especially when the delays in decommissioning are also considered. Additionally, idiosyncrasies in the foundation aid from the state of New York formula mean that the funding we receive from the state is delayed by 2 to 3 years. We believe a higher level of both federal and state funding spread out over longer timeline is more appropriate and will allow us to raise taxes more gradually and create long-term plans for revenue stabilization. 8 years is a blink of an eye in the terms of governmental planning and not nearly long enough to ask our community to make up for the 30% of its annual revenue, the amount that we have lost due to the closure of the plant. Our district has done its best to decrease expenses by evaluating programs and services to find efficiencies and to make reductions where appropriate. But continuing these cost-cutting measures will shortly become extremely detrimental to our schools, negatively impacting the quality of the education we provide, and unless a better revenue stream can be found. We may be soon found facing the types of cuts that will result in our district becoming less competitive, which may also potentially result in the decrease of our local property values. If the Hendrick-Hudson Central School District does not receive further financial assistance, taxes may need to rise by more than 30% over just 5 years to maintain the district's budget, or else we will be forced to drastically cut personnel and programs for our students. Due to the New York State 2% tax cap and inflation, it will be all but impossible to raise this much this quickly, and being forced to cut staff and reduce learning opportunities will have a devastating effect on our schools, our community, and most importantly, our students. Our children and families cannot wait. We are a vital part of the community, providing an essential, accessible, common meeting place for theater, music, sports, learning, and community service. We need your help to increase our funding stream so that we can continue to serve our families and our community and remain one of the finest school districts in the state of New York. We respectfully request meeting with those individuals and departments who can assist us in obtaining these desperately needed funds, and we look forward to working together with you to ensure that the future of our community remains bright. And again, this is signed jointly by myself as Superintendent of Schools, our Board of Education, our Teachers Union, Administrators Union, our Secretaries Union, and all of our PTAs, and I'm grateful for their input on this, and thank you for the time to speak.
Thank you.
So to continue on with the presentation showing how we have utilized the funds, these are the brief objectives we have of the brief presentation, just to provide insight into the milestones that we've reached, and if need be, explain some of the district decision-making process behind those milestones. We can go on to the next slide. So these are the areas where we have updates. We'll update you on the funding sources and what we've done with them, the update on the baseline environmental survey that was a component of how we use these funds, and the gamma detection solution that will be used to monitor the air quality in and around Buchanan-Verplanck Elementary School. Next slide, please. So as of February 2024, the contract addendum allowing us to access the funds between the state of New York and our school district has been signed and approved by the Board of Education in the state of New York. Shortly thereafter, we established a fund that was designated to deposit those, the funding source in, and we were able to work with NYSERDA to deposit those funds. On the next slide, having been able to deposit those funds, we were able to engage in the baseline environmental assessment. This was a component of the agreement and the contract between New York State and the school district. And in the spring of 2024, that baseline environmental survey was completed by a company called Langen, which stands for Langen Engineering Environmental Survey, Landscape and Architecture and Geography. We have received that report. I do not know how to read that report. I'm a recovering social studies teacher, so we of course rely on the experts to do that, so we have shared it with those experts, and we are seeking to engage a meeting with Langen so they can help explain that to us. And we also shared it with state experts who will be able to give us an idea when they have a chance to review as well. Next slide, please. We also had to purchase a gamma detection solution. This is to monitor the air quality. We had a decision point here. The terms of the contract state that we must use the solution to monitor during heavy deconstruction and demolition. we were faced with the decision, it's a limited pot of money to purchase both the equipment and the monitoring services that go along with that equipment. And especially if, given our current financial situation, we are trying to cut costs at every approach that, or every aspect that do not directly benefit students from an educational standpoint. If we have to maintain monitoring services on a professional license or a professional subscription, that costs money year after year. So the problem that we were faced was we had market price quotes for a very expensive solution and equipment that could increase if we waited any longer to buy that. So we explained this, this problem with the vendor that we were seeking to partner with, and also our partners at the state. And because of those conversations, we were able to secure additional 2 years of monitoring at no cost to the district. So we went ahead and are in the procurement process at this time to purchase the equipment. And at this time, that is my update, and I'll yield any questions.
Thank you. Safe to say the consultant didn't flag any actionable items for you?
And I apologize, yes. I can't read it enough just to say that every level that did come back was in allowable ranges.
Thank you. And I know only recently the report was shared, the feedback was provided to you and the consultant, and we'd invite either the consultant or you to make another presentation with more details at a future DOB meeting. Is that all right?
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes?
Thank you so much for that really powerful statement from you and everyone in the community. Emiliana Ulay, County Legislator, District 9, which includes Hendrick Hudson School District. Can you just remind us how much...
Legislator,
Yes.
Can you speak more into the mic? Thank you.
Forgive me. Can you remind us how much annually you were getting in the pilot agreement when Indian Point was operational?
I believe at the peak it was $22 million.
And how much are you getting right now in replacement revenue from the state?
We currently, at its height, the cessation fund was, I believe, $15 million a year. And each year, the cessation fund will decrease by $2 million a year over the next, I believe, there will be 6 years remaining, if my calculations are correct.
So in last year's budget, you received how much?
Approximately $12 million.
$12 million. So in 3 years, you went from, or 4 years, from 22 to 12?
That is correct. We received a little bit of an additional boost the first year, I believe.
There's also ongoing pilot payments from Hilltech as well.
Yes, we do receive a minor, much smaller pilot payment from Holtec.
How much is that?
I can check in my notes real quick, but I believe it's approximately $4 million a year.
Okay. So about 16 total between both sources?
Correct.
Still about a $6 million gap.
Yes, that is correct.
What are you doing?
So, as a school
How are you
district,
handling
we can have lots of bake sales, or, that's a bad joke. As a school district, we have to operate where our revenue matches our expenses. And our revenue comes from a very limited source, property taxes, state aid, some earned interest income. Our expenses come in the form of contracts and everything we do to keep our schools open. So we have to look at either increasing revenue, so that would become an increased state aid, which, according to the formula aid in previous years, it had increased by a little bit because of our wealth ratio, because the reactors shut down. That did decrease the wealth ratio in that state aid formula, but it did not come anywhere close to what we were used to. And then additionally, we also can raise taxes or cut program. And when you cut program, that means staff, that means instructional opportunities for students, and that means that our students are forced to bear the brunt of anything that we have to do to adjust to this.
Have you cut any staff since the decrease in revenue? has taken place?
In net terms, the school district has done a good job of planning for the rainy day, since the plant was notified that it was shutting down. So they've done what they can to maintain program and staffing, and we haven't had to have the drastic cuts, but that rainy day is now upon us.
At what point, in how many more years do you expect that you will have to turn to cutting staff in order to make up the difference?
So it's hard to tell because there's so many input variables that we don't know as we go into each year around this time. I, as an estimate right now, know that I have to cut $4 million from this year's budget from last year because we have a decrease of $2 million of revenue from the cessation fund. And we estimate we have about a $100 million budget. We can estimate a 2% about $2 million we'd have to cut with just a rollover of our contracts of what we owe for employee retirement benefits, teacher retirement benefits. So a good estimate is I have to make up $4 million from last year.
Is that taking into account any increase in property taxes on the school budget?
We wouldn't know what our property tax increase would look like right now, so we have to plan within the 2% tax cap.
Right.
We have to remain within that as well, too.
Have you been able to pass budgets right under the cap, at the cap?
For a number of years, the budgets had remained, of course, we always try to go under the cap. The law allows us to go over the cap,
Right.
but to do so, it would require a supermajority of 60% of the voters voting in favor of the proposition rather than just a simple majority. And what the alternative side of going over the cap means that we're putting homeowners in a position who may not be able to afford that increase. And if you look at our demographics, approximately 60% of our district's population does not have students in the school district.
What has your student enrollment looked like over the last 10 years? Has there been increases, decreases? Is there room for the school to take in more children without impacting overhead costs? What does that look
So
like?
we're trending much as most New York suburban school districts are in general. We're seeing a decrease in enrollment, but it's we've been steady for the past couple of years. It's not a drastic decrease. Our buildings, we'd always love to be able to have more space because more space isn't just for classrooms, it involves extra opportunities for students. So.
Can you say how many students you've had
I'd have to
dropped
pull
by
up,
any chance?
over 10 years, I'd
Curious.
have to give you follow-up on that.
As a legislator who works closely with our local government colleagues, and we've had discussions about different ways we can try to make up the revenue by, I won't speak on the record about proposals that haven't been decided on, but different things that we can do to try to make up the lost revenue through development or otherwise. So knowing how much room you have to take in kids without impacting overhead costs would be important as those types of plans are discussed.
And enrollment is a key variable, but more kids doesn't necessarily mean more revenue in every situation. It also has the expense side of it as well.
Of course.
And we are grateful for some of the help of our legislators and representatives sitting here at this table and the decommissioning board for allowing us, or the New York State, for allowing us to access the cessation mitigation fund. So that does help and it has eased the burden. But as our district signatories of the letter of the joint statement that I read, it's not enough. And I will be providing copies, signed copies for every member of the Decommissioning Oversight Board and legislatures, copies of that statement as well. But I will definitely send to your office our enrollment trend and also the exact figures.
Has state aid remained the same over the last few years? What's the trend in state aid?
In terms for our district, we've actually seen our state aid increase because the wealth ratio of our school district has decreased because of when you calculate in the wealth of the generating reactors, that counted towards us, actually helped us when those went offline from a state aid point of view, but it was not directly proportionate to what we lost from the pilot.
Thank you so much,
Thank
and thank
you.
you for all you're doing.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, just to
Assembly
clarify,
member?
I
Yeah.
do think we were able to get you additional
Oh, yes.
foundation aid that was
Yes.
significant over the last couple of years.
Yes, and both you and Senator Harcum have been helpful with other grant opportunity as well, and we have to go on record for saying thank you for that.
Right, and we will continue to fight. I am curious about the...
Assembly member, can
Yeah?
you speak into your
Sorry.
mic, please?
And I forgot to introduce myself, but you introduced me, thanks, Tom. So just to clarify about the tax cap, like the tax cap is for the tax
Correct.
levy.
Correct.
So the pie itself doesn't really change. I mean, the pie is the same except for that the pilot goes away, but theoretically, what you're allowed to levy is that amount, right, that you have been levying. You're not exceeding that by more than 2% if you're just trying to hold it
Correct.
to whatever that included. That doesn't mean people's taxes won't go up, I'm not saying that, but you'd still be able to maintain your, whatever you had been levying for that budget, which included the pilot payment, without exceeding the cap.
But as revenue on the other side of the budget goes down, we have to make up that revenue some other way. So if we're losing $2 million a year from the cessation fund, we have to make up that revenue somehow.
Right, and I'm not disagreeing with you, my only point is that you wouldn't have to exceed the cap and get a 2/3 majority necessarily. I'm not saying that it wouldn't have an impact on taxpayers, because it
Correct.
absolutely would.
Right.
That's all I'm
Each year,
saying.
the taxes
Yes.
would increase, correct. The
Okay.
tax base could increase, yes.
Okay, thank you.
As easy as the tax cap is to figure out.
Yeah.
Correct, yes.
Thanks.
That's a good point,
And
though, to
and then
clarify.
good news, we have been studying that foundation aid formula, and they came out with some of the proposals already, and some of which look like there would be some potential help for school districts like Henhud, to make it easier to level off changes that happen over time with reserve funds and things of that nature. So I'm just going to throw that out.
Yes, the Rockefeller Center was tasked with studying the foundation aid. It did issue its 314-page report on Monday. I have not had a chance to read it in its entirety. And we do know that the recommendations by the Rockefeller Center could be rejected or accepted.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to call Frank up for an update from Holtec.
Tom, could I just make a comment in reference to that?
Go ahead.
So Superintendent, I extremely feel your pain. The Village of Buchanan was is a community that was severely affected by the closure. We lost 50% of our revenue. It's been challenging, it's been difficult. So my ask is to our elected officials in the state, how can you help us? I know we had a very brief conversation one day, but I'd like to delve further into that. I know the superintendent kind of touched on the spent fuel rods that are there, zero tax. There is, I mentioned once before, it's difficult to get this moving in the Congress and in the Senate. But yes, the Stranded Act, I've mentioned it before. It is wrong for any community throughout this country to have to store this spent fuel, and the property there is unusable until that gets off of the property. And I have been in conversation with Congressman Mike Lawler. He has been very supportive. We're working forward with that. Also, there's other communities throughout the country that are dealing with this. One I could mention off the top of my head is Zion, Illinois. So there's several communities throughout the country that are dealing with this. The federal government should be reimbursing these communities. So I would ask for your support to work together with us so that if we can see if we can make this happen. And also on the state level, if there are any grants or any programs that the Village of Buchanan, the school district, some of us have been affected very badly. So through no fault of our own, the plant closed, and here we are dealing with the fallout, so to speak.
Mayor, thank you so much for raising the Stranded Act. That is something the DOB has discussed repeatedly over our years of existence as something that makes a lot of policy sense, given that it is the federal government's failure to have a permanent repository for the waste that has caused us to have it here. One quick question for clarification, because several times it's been mentioned that the spent fuel rods aren't taxed. There was a state law passed that gives the local jurisdictions the authority to tax it, and my understanding is that all of the taxing jurisdictions now do have a pilot with Holtec. Is the pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, not reflecting the local government's authority to tax those properties?
So what happened with that was Buchanan that spearheaded that law, and Sandy Galiff was very instrumental in getting that passed. Pete Harcum, very instrumental. As a matter of fact, New Year's Eve, Pete Harcum was on the phone with me. See what kind of life I have. On the phone with me, Teresa, I think he's going to sign it. It was Governor Coleman at the time. So what we've seen, we have been able to negotiate with Holtec, but it really gave us a basis of what the value of the spent fuel cask were. When we get into the spent fuel, the reason why this came to mind is, with that law, is because each one of those casks are worth approximately $1 million, so you have $127 million of, the way we looked at it, of houses, $1 million houses sitting there. So that's how we kind of evaluated what it was worth. But I think the biggest thing is the federal government, who is responsible for a depository, for them to think that they can store this throughout the country and not have to pay to do these communities. So, for example, Frank is over there. Frank knows every couple of years, the nuclear power plants will sue the federal government, the DOE, to reimburse them for the expenses of keeping that spent fuel on property. So in the same token, the Stranded Act is similar to that, saying, okay, we are storing your waste that you are responsible for, and you need to give to the community some type of compensation. So that's kind of the basis for the whole Stranded Act. And I'd like to see the DOB and our other elected officials come together and see what we can do to see if we can get this moving forward, and also include Congressman Lawler.
Thank you. I think Senator Harcum has one more question before we turn it to Frank.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. Not a question, just a comment. And Mayor, thank you for your comments and your candor and your partnership. And of course, we're happy to sit down with you to just explore other grant opportunities. Usually they're capital and project specific, but money is fungible, and every little bit helps. So we will continue the partnership and the collaboration, both with the village and with the school district.
Thank you, Senator. And Superintendent Trombo, one more.
Yes, I just wanted to have a follow-up with accurate data. I didn't want to go on the record without having that. So the Holtec pilot that was negotiated between the school district and other municipalities will see us receiving it's a pilot that ends in 2029. We received $4 million last year. We'll receive $4 million this year. The next year we'll receive, in 25-26, we'll receive $3.5 million. Then in 26-27, we'll receive approximately $3 million. In 27-28, we'll receive $2.5 million. And in 28-29, we'll receive $2 million.
Thank you for the additional information. And Frank, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Frank Spagnuolo, I'm the Site VP at Indian Point. What we're going to talk about today, the next slide on the agenda, what work we've completed since our last EOB in June. One notable change to the plan, we'll talk briefly about the reactor vessel segmentation. What work activities will start in 2025. NRC updates, the tabletop exercise, which Cliff started to talk about. We'll go over an overview of the partial site release process. We'll talk about an ISO filing that we submitted in August, and finally, safety. So we'll start with the vessel seg activity since the last EOB. So there is one notable schedule change. We did transition the reactor vessel segmentation from Unit 3 to Unit 2. We did have an equipment failure in the cavity that we're right now waiting on parts. We'll repair that. So we took the opportunity to move the team over to Unit 2. And as you can see in the lower picture, lower left, lower right, we pulled the upper internals on Unit 2 and we started segmenting that. We should be completing that work and then moving back over to Unit 3 to complete the work, and that'll be in early next year. So as I was talking about, early next year, we expect by the end of January to be complete with what we're calling phase 1 of the upper internals. That's where we're harvesting all the type A waste. It's a high level of rad waste, but it's the lowest high level. So BC would be higher, and then greater than Class C is the highest. And then fuel. And then once that's complete, We'll move back over to Unit 3. We'll complete the segmentation of the remaining greater than Class C material of the lower internals. That should be complete by February. Then we'll cask all the greater than Class C material and relocate it to the Assisi pad. That should be in May. And then the last part that we'll have to do in Unit 3 is go back and just invert and segment package the bottom internal head. And that'll be a Type A and Type B waste. And that should be complete, including demob, by July. And then we'll move back over to Unit 2 and start harvesting BC waste on the upper internals. And then we'll work on the lower internals and continue that project throughout the year. For Unit 1 activities, since the last DOB, we did complete removal of all the RCS loops, commenced segmentation of the 11 steam boiler drum. That's what you see on the top row of pictures. The first one is the drum intact, and then the next few are of us segmenting them, and then also we're setting up an abatement tent for 13 boiler. As I've stated previously, everything in Unit 1 was asbestos insulation, so we'd have to do an asbestos abatement. That tent is in progress. Once that's done, we'll do a complete abatement of 13 boiler and then do the same thing. And we'll work on 11, and we'll just go around the loop, 12, 13, 14. That'll be all throughout next year. So for early next year, we'll complete the abatement of 13 boiler, and then we'll start the abatement on 11 lower drum. A little change, we did the upper drum. That was the first one. We really need to see what it looked like underneath the insulation to come up with our plan. So now we know, and now we'll be able to, we'll follow our plan going right around. This year, we also would like to remove the Unit 1 head, and that's the picture you see, the black and white pictures. The first picture up there is a legacy picture of what the Unit 1 head looked like when it was in the stand, and the lower picture is what it looks like now mounted on the reactor. We'll cut the studs, pull the head, and the reason we need to do that is we need more dose information, characterization data to know how we're going to package the Unit 1 vessel.
Package it for eventual
dismantling,
shipment.
yeah. I mean, we had, so I mean, there's several different ways that we can segment the vessel or ship it whole. It's a small vessel, it is possible to be shipped whole.
Depending on the dose.
Depending on what's inside the vessel. That's why.
Yep.
So the other thing we're working on is the Unit 3 spent fuel pool. As I discussed earlier, the Unit 2 spent fuel pool, racks are removed and shipped. Unit 3, we did clean the racks, surveyed them, cleaned them. They're all removed and shipped off-site. And right now, we're in the process of cleaning up and vacuuming the bottom of the pool. We'll remove any material that we find down there, package that up, and then the Unit 3 spent fuel pool will be basically sitting until we're ready to do a dismantlement of that pool. And the pictures you see here are basically of us pulling the racks and shipping them off-site. For conventional plant demo, so we're working on several of our buildings at the same time. One of them is called the Power Conversion Equipment Building. It's just a building with a lot of electronics in it, transformers and switchgear. We've basically gutted the internal components of that building, ready to a demo next year. As Kelly stated, we're continuing to work on MOSF tank removal. We removed 7 tanks recently, and we'll just continue that throughout next year, that process will go. There's several underground storage tanks that we'll continue to remove. For the Unit 2 feed water heater removals, those feed water heaters are prepped for removal, and the protected area access facility, if anybody's been through the site, it's the command post. That has been gutted, and we'll take that building down. You can see some of the pictures. The top picture there is a laydown area on the southern property. Those are circ water pumps and feed water heaters and circ water pump motors, and you can see one traveling screen. The picture on the upper right is one of the traveling screens that was being removed from the intake structure. The bottom left is one of the underground storage tanks that was removed. That was the security diesel tank. And the picture on the bottom right is one of the circ water pumps that's being removed from the intake structure. So what we're going to work on in 2025, early 2025, is to remove the command post, the path structure. The next slide, Tom. Which is the second picture on the upper right. Then we'll remove the Unit 2 security building, which is our old command post, which is this picture on the upper left. The Unit 3 security building, which is on the lower right, and the Unit 3 PCE building, which is on the lower left. And then we're also doing preparations for old steam generator dismantlement. So during the 80s and 90s and 2000, we replaced all 8 original steam generators that are all stored on site, and we will come up with a plan to start segmenting those and shipping them off site. So that's the work. We've completed the work we're going to do in 2025, start of 2025. For the NRC inspections, as Cliff stated, the second quarter report is the last report that was issued on August 6th, and it had no violations. The third quarter report should be issued at any moment. We don't expect anything in that as well. For the inspections, they're as listed. So the NRC was on site in July, August, September, and November, and they were doing their inspections as well as hosting the Taiwan regulator. Basically, the Taiwan NRC was here to support that, and they completed all of these inspections without any issues. And then the last one was the solid waste management. Some of the pictures there are about solid waste management. The first one, the upper left, is the rail system on Unit 1. That's how we're getting all the equipment out of Unit 1 and into the Unit 1, and then we package it and ship it. Picture on the upper right is another floor, the fuel handling floor, where we package everything, and the bottom picture is at the rail yard in Connecticut. So the emergency planning table type exercise was held on November 13th. Cliff talked about it. It really just demonstrated the ability of IPEC to perform adequately during a postulated event. It included all the members from New York State, Westchester, Rockland, Verplank, Fire, and New York State Police. Focused on the asphyxia emergency classification levels. This was our first drill with the fuel on pad protected with the asphyxia pad as the only protected area. The asphyxia emergency action levels, asphyxia only emergency plan overview, and make sure we could do timely and accurate notifications, and develop appropriate mitigating actions, and obviously perform effective communications. There was open dialogue amongst all the parties, and we have learning opportunities. This is an annual requirement to do these drills, and we'll be ready for next year's drill. Okay, so the next one here is an overview of how we're going to release the property eventually. Right now, the schedule shows 2041 that will be in partial site release. So partial site release, as everyone has stated, includes everything except the asphyxia pad. So on that drawing up there, it shows parcels A, B, and D. They're all part of our license document, so they'll all require Code of Federal Regulations 5083 release process. So in order to release any piece of property, we can release property early. So that was the whole point to what we're doing. We were looking into how we're going to do this. We have never done this before, so we wanted to see what we're going to do in order to try to release property, especially on the southern end, that may be able to be reused earlier than 2041. So in order to release part of a facility or site for unrestricted use, which is our requirement, our commitment, at any time before receiving approval for a full license termination plan, you have to make sure that that the effective release in the property to ensure the dose of the individual members is less than the Part 20 limit, which is our normal limit. There is no impact to emergency planning, physical security, effluent releases, or siting criteria for Part 100, which is our accident criteria. We have to update the environmental monitoring program, off-site dose calculation manual, ensure all other applicable statutory and regulatory requirements continue to be met. And we also have to perform a historical site assessment. On top of this, if it's an area of concern, then we have the DEC and the remedial investigation plans, as Kelly talked about. But this is the process that will follow today and by 2041. So NISO filing. So in August, we submitted a request to New York Independent System Operator for 200 megawatts of power. And so we're looking to see what the availability is on the grid. According to all news reports, there is very little, if any. So we want to see what's available for any potential reuse for the site. No matter what we put there is going to need power. It's not going to come from Indian Point. So we put in a request for a data center. Data centers are huge across the country. There's really nothing in this area, but they are a huge power consumption. So we did it. It's really a proactive measure to assess the availability of energy for potential high-energy commercial use. It's really for any use. Specifically, we sought to determine if sufficient energy would be available to support a potential data center at the site of where the training building is. And that's what this picture is the training building. And you can see in the upper right corner, that's the switchyard. So the vicinity of the switchyard to the training building is close, and there's also a 345 kV power line that goes right through the property. So we thought if there was any power, this would be a good source where we're going to actually start redeveloping the area. So the inquiry is part of a future business development efforts. It's aimed at reusing the property. Currently, we have no offer. We're not working with any outside, Amazon, Microsoft, nobody for a data center or anything. We're just looking to see what's out there and what the availability is. Okay, so in order to do this, we have to follow the 5083 process. In order to follow the 5083 process, we have to do samples. We have to drill wells, we have to do core samples. So we did that, I can't remember exactly how many samples, and in July, we performed surface soil sampling on the property around the training building, and one soil sample was found to contain elevated cesium-137 concentrations as compared to the rest of the soil samples and background. So the area was not identified as an area of concern. We did not expect to see any cesium or any radioactive components there at all. The information, we did take this, we entered it into our corrective action program. We're doing what we call an apparent cause evaluation, and we're in the process of developing a sample plan to fully characterize the extent of the condition. So upon completion of the characterization, the soil will be removed consistent with the requirements of 5083, and we'll keep you informed as we go through the steps. And we're going to expand our scope of what we're looking at, but it's going to take some time. Ultimately, it's slightly above background, but we can't say it's not due to a natural cause, okay, such as runoff or something like that. So there's much more to come on that. We are in the process of doing it. It's part of our characterization, and we've discussed it with the DEC, and it may become an area of concern, or it may follow the Marston process, right? So there's just different processes, but I kind of want to show you the process actually works. The 5083, the remedial investigation work plan, the process works, and it will catch anything that's around the entire site. And this is outside the site. Everybody can see the training building from Broadway. And the last slide is a workforce safety update. We did have one first aid since our last DOB, and that was 2 individuals were attempting to move a bottle by hand and up a 24-inch step, and one of them slipped and banged their knee. Nothing more than first aid was required. And the dose there is listed up to the end of the third quarter, and we're below goal for the year. And that concludes my report pending questions.
Thank you, Frank. Any questions for Frank?
Yes.
Supervisor Becker.
Thank you. Thank you for this report. A lot of information in there that we need to digest. Taking the last topic first, that the cesium was found. Can you quantitate? I mean, is it just a little cesium, a small, tiny little, thing? Because you said there could even be just come from the environment, or is it a huge amount of cesium?
No, it's not a huge amount.
It's
it's confined to a small area behind the training building where we don't know where it came from. We'll be honest with you. When we did these samples, this is our first attempt at a 5083. So part of the survey analysis that we did is we went out into I think, 5 or 6 parks in the area and took soil samples for our background study. Then we did probably 40 or so soil samples around the entire training building, from the parking lot all the way out to Broadway, and one of them came back with an elevated level above background.
Is this something that would be stored on site in canisters, or how would it be disposed of?
When we remediate it,
Yeah.
it would be disposed of. We'll just drum it up. It's not, depending on how much soil we see, I mean, we have to do a lot more samples, understand what the extent is, and then we'll document that, we'll come up with our plan, and then we'll remove it, we'll ship it.
Okay, thank you. And the only other quick comment I have is about what you discussed. It sounds like you're investigating the possibility for future companies that are involved in AI to come in, and they're huge data storage centers and data usage centers that require tons of energy. So you're looking to partner perhaps with a company that would require this, and then you would generate more power on the site?
No.
As a future use?
No, that's why we requested from NISO if there's 200 megawatts of power available on the grid now. No power coming from the
So
site.
you're interested in pulling from the grid, but not doing something like Microsoft did, where they rebuilt the plant, or planning to rebuild the plant to generate that? Okay.
No, that's not the plan.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
No problem.
Frank, Teresa Knickerbocker, Village of Buchanan Mayor. Frank, I am happy to see that the company is looking at a certain parcel, perhaps. No promises, no guarantees, but, you're starting the process of the site characterization to see the viability of potentially releasing that. And that would be welcome news for development, not only for the Village of Buchanan, but the school district and also the town, all the local communities. So, but thank you that the site characterization on that piece of property is being looked at. How many acres is that parcel D?
21, well, it would be a portion of parcel B. Parcel B includes the warehouse and a bigger parcel. If you go back to the picture that showed the different parcels, this is a small part of parcel B. There are parts of parcel B that we wouldn't be able to release because it's still in use, right? But the training building,
Now that has
we have no
the
use
names.
for it. We can take the building down tomorrow and reuse it. But this is the process that we would follow. There's a caveat, the 5083 process is basically a license amendment type, so it's a 1-year or more review by the NRC. So these things do not happen very quick. And if it's an area of concern that we're releasing, that's a couple-of-year process to get through that whole remedial investigation. So that's why we're trying to, we picked a parcel we thought would be the easiest and learn how to do it. It's one of our objectives as well.
And it would just, like you said, the remediation of the C-137, was it? The cesium.
Cesium, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Frank.
Superintendent? Yes, Michael Trombley again, Hendrick Hudson Central School District. Frank, just if you can keep us in the loop about the authorization to energize the grid and pull that much power, because as part of a New York State mandate by 2035, I believe, we have to have our entire bus fleet on electric vehicles, and we also have to conduct ongoing assessments of the grid to see if we can power that. So if we can just stay in contact about.
You better get in NISO's queue, it's pretty long.
I believe our technical expert, Dave Lockbaum, has a question online.
Yeah, this is Dave Lockbaum. I appreciate it. Thanks, Frank, for the update. I just want to confirm my understanding. The discovery of the cesium-137 would have been found under the 5083 process, independent of the potential data center development. Is that correct?
Correct. We're in the 5083 process.
Right. Thank you, Frank.
Richard Webster?
Yeah, I have a few questions, Frank. So, first of all, according to my Googling, cesium has a half-life of about 30 years, right? 30? So this isn't historic contamination. I mean, it's occurred within the lifetime of the plant.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
And the REMP program didn't find anything?
The levels that we're seeing are so low, our detectors on site can't see them. These are all specialized detectors that are reading just a background. So that's a vendor that we bring in with specialized equipment that can read rad levels this low.
Do you have a multiple of background that it is?
Excuse me?
Do you have a multiple of background?
The number?
How much higher than background? Is that the
It's
question?
About 4 times higher. So roughly, background in our area that we saw was anywhere from 0.23 picocuries per gram to 0.58 picocuries per gram. And we're about 22 picocuries per gram, and that's our preliminary results. So that's our internal lab. We have to send it to a certified lab. So those are preliminary results.
No, thanks for that. That's very helpful. I mean, just as an editorial, it's never good when you find
I agree.
radioactive materials that you don't expect to be there. And, cesium is something that the reactor generates while it's working, right? So, if you're going to look around for where did the cesium come from, one of the primary candidates would be the former operating reactor, correct?
Correct. Yeah, cesium is a fission product.
Right. So on the 5083 process, how does that interface? Is the 10 CFR Part 20 limit the 25 millirems per year?
Excuse me?
Is the... Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Is the 10 CFR Part 20 limit the 25 millirems per year?
No.
Okay. What is that limit?
I don't have that number.
What's the question?
Well, in other words, my understanding is the federal limit for site release is 25 millirems per year. The JP has a limit of 10 millirems per year.
Right.
And I want to understand how those two numbers interact.
I don't have that answer right now. But the 10 milligram limit is not a Code of Federal Regulation number.
No, that's right. It's in the, but it is a legally binding number.
I'm not saying it's not.
Yeah, it's in the joint proposal. It was agreed to by all the parties in the PSC proceeding, Riverkeeper, all the local governmental entities, Holtec, Entergy. So that is the standard.
But what I'm saying is the Code of Federal Regulations is the law for the U.S. So that's the requirement for 5083. Part of our settlement agreement, joint proposal, has us go to 10 and more. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm telling you what the federal law is, not what our agreement was.
No, and
I understand.
Right, I understand that. But what I'm trying to say is, when do you take account of the limit in the JP?
Again, I didn't
think-
break out all the definitions from the joint proposal. I just figured I'd stick to the code.
But I think maybe I can ask the question a different way, Richard. You acknowledge that finding cesium in this location will require further site investigation and remediation, and when it is remediated, that the remediation will have to meet the JP standard of 10 millirem.
Correct.
Is that the question?
Yeah, I mean, I just...
And the answer was yes, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I also
This,
jump in?
I'm just confused.
Hold on one
This
second, just
slide
on this
doesn't-
point,
okay,
Kelly
go
wants to
ahead.
jump in as well.
Go ahead.
So in addition, we have the DEC consent order.
Right.
As Frank mentioned, that the area is currently not an AOC, an area of concern, but DEC has been informed of this information. We've asked for additional information, and we're looking at it to determine whether or not it becomes an area of concern, which then the DEC consent order would apply the 10 millirem standard. And that's exactly why we have the consent order. For circumstances like this, as they're remediating the site, things that come up that nobody knew about, we can then put them into the consent order and require the remediation of the site.
Great, thank you.
Can I just add, Susan Spear, my recollection of when we were negotiating the JP was that number was based on the DEC standard in the consent order.
Consent order.
Yeah.
And it was the level that was agreed to.
Right. I'm glad we all agree on that. This is great. So, final thing, and this is just a query from me, because you said you were segmenting greater than Class C. And so what is the material and do you have to, I mean, it just surprised me. I thought most of the reactor internals are not Class C or greater than Class C.
So the highest levels of radioactivity are anything in the, what we call the beltline region where the fuel was. So the core itself, the lower core, the area around where the fuel was is irradiated. So it becomes greater than Class C. It's the most highly radioactive waste on site next to the fuel.
Okay, so it is part of the reactor vessel.
Correct. Oh, yeah, no, that's all we're doing is working on the reactor vessels right now.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Frank. That's all I have.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Legislator?
Thank you so much. Emiliana Ulay. Can you speak to how many staff are on site working? Have there been any changes in the last quarter?
Yeah, so the latest numbers, I ran December 2nd. We have 280 full-time employees. In August, we had 315. We did have a layoff of around 35 people right around Labor Day when a couple of projects ended up, spent fuel pool, rack work, reactor head segmentation. And this kind of sets us up for next year for the work that that I've already briefed us on. So the crews that we have here are the crews that we plan on doing the work that we laid out for 2025.
So you expect the staffing levels to stay at 280 for 2025?
I'm not going to guarantee anything, but that's what my plan is.
Thank you. Are there any subcontractors who work on site over the last year, and do you expect others for 2025?
A majority of that people, the 280 are subcontractors. The HDI, HSI, Holtec International is probably less than 100. I don't have the number off the top of my head.
Can you speak to any major fund dispersions from the Decommissioning Trust Fund in the last quarter that we should be aware of?
None that I know of.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Tom Kaczmarek, I'd like to move on to the public statement portion of the meeting.
Absolutely, thank you. And before I provide my general intro here, if there happens to be, apologies, if Jocelyn DiCrescenzo is on the line, please just use the raise hand function so we can find you. You'll be the first speaker tonight if you're on the line. Following that, we will have Rachel Davis. Today's public statement period is 30 minutes in duration. Attendees will be called on in the order in which they registered, starting with those participating virtually. To provide a fair opportunity to speak, there will be a strict 3-minute time limit. Your line will be unmuted for those joining virtually when it is your turn to speak. Just please confirm before you do begin speaking that your microphone is unmuted. Speakers will be cut off if they do exceed that 3-minute time limit, so please do pay attention to the time. I will provide updates. You can see on, at least in the screen here, a 3-minute timer. I'll remind you when there's 30 seconds remaining. Please do not exceed that time limit. Again, our first speaker is Jocelyn DiCrescenzo on the line. All right, you've been unmuted. Apologies, you've been asked to unmute. Please, you have to accept the...
Yes.
There you go.
Yes, this is Jocelyn. I thank you so much for the opportunity. I would ask permission to speak a little bit later, maybe in about 20 minutes or half an hour, because I need time to digest all of the information that I've just subsequently learned tonight that I didn't know about. So if I could have the opportunity to speak in a little bit, I would really appreciate that.
We can accommodate that.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Next is Rachel Davis.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So my name is Rachel Davis. I am the Public Policy and Justice Organizer for New Jersey-based Water Spirit, a spiritual ecology nonprofit. I speak today with deep respect for the sacredness of water and the land which we share. particularly here in New Jersey, and as all the waterways connect to New York. As we navigate the future of energy, I'm just speaking in solidarity with Indigenous communities and those affected directly by nuclear power and the aftermath, and the Earth, and calling for protection of our sacred resources, especially water. I actually spent many of my summers at Blue Royal Day Camp in Muncie, New York, in Rockland County, and I really appreciate tonight's presentation. I'd like to ask for further clarity regarding the industry groups and regulated communities mentioned as the drivers for revising water withdrawal regulations. So I'd like if you could specify who they are. Water is not just a commodity, it's a spirit and a force that sustains all life. We really cannot allow any technology, regardless of its size, especially as these, the media is kind of doing a frenzy on AI and how nuclear should be powering it, to continue consuming and contaminating this vital resource. Specifically, again, with respect to AI or hydrogen hubs, it really presents a really grave threat to our water systems, which are already extremely, in extreme dire situations. As we heard tonight, nuclear energy requires vast amounts of water to cool reactors that often take from already stressed rivers, lakes, and aquifers. And even those small-scale reactors, as they might come up, risk leaks, thermal pollution, and accidents through our precious water resources. Many are also located on or near indigenous lands, which perpetuate a history of exploitation. We must not allow this cycle to continue. Our responsibility really is to protect these lands and waters for future generations, not to expose them to further risk. So I just want to recognize that we're looking for leadership to ensure it's time for us to turn towards sustainable, water conserving, and truly renewable energy alternatives, really understanding that water is life and we are not going to get any more of it. So technologies that respect all life and recognize our deep interconnection with the earth should be prioritized now for a just and stable, livable future. I urge this board to reject the revival of nuclear energy in any form. Really, I'm happy to speak further about stranded assets. I've been working in this field for almost 20 years, and to prioritize solutions that honor our sacred resources. So, we want to make sure that all life is honored, and I'm happy to, again, share comments in writing. This is our first opportunity to speak before this board, but there's, of course, growing interest from New Jersey in what's going on in New York with respect to nuclear. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Next, we'll move to in-person. James Rogulski, followed by Susan Shapiro and Tina Volz-Bongar. Again, just a reminder of the 3-minute timer. Please keep an eye on the screen, and I'll provide an update 30 seconds if it appears it's necessary. Mr. Rogulski?
Test. Esteemed members of the Indian Point Power Plant Decommissioning Oversight Board, hello again. My name is James Rogulski. I'm the president of the Hendrick Hudson Education Association. It's the teachers union serving the Hendrick Hudson School District. This may be a bit redundant following Superintendent Trombley, but I encourage my students to advocate, and I believe in leading by example. During the last meeting of this panel, I spoke about the impending fiscal difficulties facing the school system, students, my members, taxpayers, and other employees of the district. Since that meeting, no further plans to mitigate these issues has been initiated by this board, New York State, or the federal government. This is preposterous, considering the dire acuteness of the situation for the Hendrick Hudson School District and the taxpayers that support it. Let's be clear. This situation is unique because nowhere in the U.S. is there a recently defunct nuclear power plant sitting on land in one of the most expensive, densely populated areas in the United States. As of now, the school district faces what is forecast, as Mr. Trombley said, approximately $4 million shortfall for next school year. This means the district, which provides excellent and competitive service to the entire community, and there are a few places in the world more competitive than Westchester County, must begin the process of making cuts to program and staffing while concurrently raising taxes. This situation will only compound year over year as the math is simple and brutal. The pilot Indian Point's pilot provided about 30% of the school's budget. In today's dollars, that's not $22 million, that's $30 million. The cessation fund gave the district $60 million. That money is about to run out in a couple of years, and frankly, it's not enough. It equates to just 2 to 3 years of Indian Point revenue, and if it remains the only cushion for the community, will not appropriately shield the district from either serious tax increases, cuts to program, or most likely and unfortunately, both. This short timeline will prove disruptive to the schools and the community. Holtec's pilot's just a fraction of what Entergy's was. So the district's current educational offerings, the district has projected to keep the current educational offering. The district has projected that taxes with no further help are going to need to increase about 30% over the next 5 years. In this inflationary environment, taxpayers will not cast a supermajority vote of 60% to have their taxes raised by close to double digits year after year. The fiscal cliff Hendrick Hudson faces is completely ridiculous and viciously ironic considering the exponentially growing largesse of Holtec's decommissioning fund, which has now surpassed $2 billion. A fraction of that fund, which grows with the stock market, would easily correct this glaring, disturbing oversight by New York State and federal government.
Mr. Rogalski?
Give me 2 seconds. Thank you, Tom. I understand the NRC does not allow for this, but they should be lobbied to change their policy. I do want to thank Superintendent Trombley, Senator Harcum, online, Assemblywoman Levenberg, Legislator Ulai, former Assemblywoman Galiff, Supervisor Becker, and Mayor Knickerbocker for their fastidious and ferocious advocacy. I will be in touch with all of you and will help you in garnering help for the Hendrick Hudson School District as best as I can. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Ms. Shapiro? Followed by Tina Volsbongar and Jacqueline Drexler.
Thank you. Good to see you tonight. There are some questions that I would like to ask that were brought up in this discussion today. The on-site inspector said that you're discharging radioactive effluent into the Hudson River. I understand that's against the law. Why is that not being enforced? I'd like to have a conversation about that. When do you think the draft Speedies permit is to be expected? When will be ready for the public to make comments? These are some of my questions. And I'm really concerned as to why the school district has to pay for monitoring. Holtec should be paying for the monitoring. I don't understand why that's coming out of the school district's budget. And that's something the state should fix. It's Holtec's responsibility to pay for that monitoring. And I also agree with the mayor that the federal government should be paying for the storage of the spent fuel. But really, Holtec should be paying for the storage of the spent fuel. They're getting money from the federal government to store the spent fuel. They're getting that benefit. They should then pay the taxes to the town. And that, I don't understand why that's not happening. Now, getting to the cesium issue that was recently discovered, no one mentioned when that was discovered. I'd like to know how long ago that was discovered. This is very similar to when the cesium was accidentally found along the edges of spent fuel pool 2. And when they finally started investigating, they found it was throughout the site that there were cesium leaks. We know this is a fractured bedrock site. Cesium that was from the reactor operations has leaked into the ground. You're talking about releasing that particular building to the public. It's now surrounded, at least it has some cesium nearby. It has a full investigation by the DEC and by everybody needs to take place to understand the extent of the cesium and how the cleanup's going to happen. Because what we do know is that the cesium and the tritium and the other effluent in the ground was left in the ground by the NRC. It's still there and it's still leaking. That's something that was not discussed today as to how that's going to be remediated, nor was discussed today what is going to happen, what is the plan for the existing tritium on site. That was a big issue months ago here, and now it's just being ignored. That tritium is sitting in the spent fuel pools. One's cracked. We know spent fuel pool 2 is cracked. It's still leaking into the Hudson River. There's no discussion of storage tanks or permitting of storage tanks or anything. We're just going to allow it. This board needs to be proactive about that. I quickly want to discuss worker safety. There's been problems at Pilgrim, extensive problems at Pilgrim of worker contamination. And it's really important that the DOB has oversight with OSHA and with the Department of Health as to what's going on in Indian Point, especially since, as you all probably remember, Holtec made the workers sign, waive their rights to whistleblowing. So it's great that we have a site that they can call into, but their employment contract prevents them from doing that.
Mr.
That's a
Shapiro.
serious issue. So, thank you for your time, but I do think that, these issues really need to be resolved, and we just go around and around and nothing gets resolved. So I really ask, what's happening with the tritium? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips-Bongar.
Yes, hi, thank you for letting me speak. So Richard Webster, we brought this up in our meeting with Victoria, is that we would really like an education about what's happening with the water and the spent fuel pool, the 450,000 people who don't want the tritium dumped in the Hudson. I don't think they want any more radionuclides going in there. And just as Susan said, it would be great to know how that's going to be remediated. I want to direct my questions now to Susan Spear, and this is about the tabletop exercise that went on. 2 years ago, I did the community advocate presentation on the pipeline and Indian Point, so I'm really concerned about this. And the first question I have is, when you did this tabletop exercise, did you look at the integrity management system of Enbridge's that was highlighted by the National Safety Board in the accident that happened in Kentucky when somebody was incinerated? Actually, 2 people were killed. And if there were that kind of accident next to the asphyxie pad or anywhere near that, it's of huge concern. So I have that question. And that was something that I asked DPS to look into, and I never heard any follow-up on. And then I want to point out our expert, Rick Kuperwitz, when he came to speak to the board, he wanted us to look at the smart pigging systems and how those are run, especially in the pipes next to the asphyxie pad and those. So I'm wondering when the last one was done, and when the next one will be done, and are there comparisons on that, especially around corrosion, because of salt and, whatever. But it's especially on the, on the site, and the pipelines that are running on the site, and taking this big equipment and everything. So do you have any answers to those questions?
As we've done in previous meetings, we take all of these questions and we'll respond in writing to them when we can have access to all of our experts. So we will absolutely took the notes for Susan's questions and yours, and we will get you answers before the next meeting.
Okay, great. And so the reason that when my community advocate presentation was done, Mr. Condon, and I just never received any kind of answer about whether or not you were going to take those standards that were put out there in Enbridge's integrity management system. The way that an emergency is reported among its workers and the system that they have in place. And this changed regulations of PHMSA, okay? So this is important stuff here with the pipelines.
We're over time.
Yeah, I'm sure we are. So we just really need to know these critical things from Enbridge, right? In looking and evaluating the emergency planning.
Your questions have been noted and will be answered. Thank you.
Ms. Drexler, followed by Pamela Hudson, and then we'll return to Ms. DiCrescenzo.
Hi, thanks for this opportunity to speak. There have been so many things mentioned tonight that I want to pivot to all of that, but I'm actually going to stick with what I thought of for tonight. So in 2020, Pilgrim Plant in Massachusetts, workers received unplanned intakes of radioactive material. It was a level 4 violation with no fines. In 2022, Pilgrim Plant, a fire was discovered by a worker in a room that was posted as a contamination area and a high radiation area. Holtec did not issue a hot work permit for a portable halogen lamp. NRC said it was not willful or repetitive, therefore it was a non-cited violation. August 2023 whistleblower letter, Pilgrim again, on the use of evaporators, immersion heaters. Holtec directed staff to boil away the tritiated water volume in the spent fuel pools. This prompted our local Indian Point advocates to request an inspection at Indian Point to make sure that they were not using heaters to boil away the tritiated water. Mr. Congdon arranged for an inspection, and we were told that they currently were not using this at Indian Point. However, Holtec can do this at any time that they want to, but we do thank you, Mr. Congdon. September 2023, Holtec was caught transporting radioactive waste machinery from their Oyster Creek station in New Jersey to Indian Point in New York in violation of DOT regulations. Workers were exposed to radioactive waste contamination. Holtec admitted to less than adequate oversight and risk determination. Pilgrim Plant, March 2023. In June of 2024, regarding Pilgrim Plant, there was an article by Christine Legere about an anonymous letter with a worker who was exposed to enough radiation to set off radiation detection monitors for weeks. Patrick O'Brien of Holtec said that the dose did not exceed allowed exposure limits. Neil Sheehan of the NRC said we do not have evidence of workers at the site experiencing overexposure. Then in 2023, Adam Schneider, a worker at the Pilgrim Plant, got sick and filed a complaint. Mr. Schneider was told by his doctors that his illness, radiation sickness, required medicines that people on chemotherapy take to control nausea. Holtec tried to have this complaint dismissed, but Mr. Schneider's attorney prevailed and showed through documentation that both Mr. Schneider and another co-worker
30 seconds.
who developed symptoms of the same at the same time and had to have part of his tongue and esophagus removed got sick from their work. Well, I will just end with that David Lockbaum said, NRC inspectors in recent years have identified radiation protection violations at Pilgrim and at Indian Point. If valid, the allegations represent true threats to worker safety. There's so much more I'd like to say here, but I think my last words here are going to be that there needs to be inspectors who live on site wherever Holtec is, because I know, and I'm waiting for you to realize, that Holtec is a dangerous company. I care about the workers and I care about their safety, and there have been way too many violations. Thank you.
Ms. Hudson?
I just need, for what I want to say today, this is some information that I'm hoping that the board will access, and especially in relation to what Jackie just said, also anybody that works at the plant and is an employee of Holtec. Okay, I'm ready to begin. Oh, sorry, I'm not really, can I get my time back? I really didn't start my message yet.
It's okay, we'll let you go 20 seconds.
All right, okay. So, 3 things compelled me to speak tonight. Number 1, I recently learned about the workers employed by Holtec at the Pilgrim plant, which it was very obviously a clear case of extreme harms, of egregious on-site exposure to radiation in the course of their duties. Like most people, I was horrified by what happened. Second reason I'm here, nuclear activism runs in my family. My sister's late father-in-law was Dr. Herbert L. Abrams, an innovative pioneer and expert of nuclear medicine, a Nobel Prize-winning founder of International Doctors Against Nuclear War, and a charter member of Physicians for Social Responsibility. This is a member of my family. He was the first expert I saw interviewed on TV immediately after the 3 Mile Island accident on March 29, 1979. As head of nuclear medicine at both Harvard and Stanford medical schools and an expert in radioactive epidemiology, he was our go-to and everybody else's go-to guy for all things radioactive. And my third reason, Hoppy, as he was known to us, is no longer here. He died. Because of that, for reason number 1, the workers who were harmed, I decided I needed to personally carry Hoppy's message whenever and wherever possible. And back to this video I want you to watch, Cinema Forum Fukushima, about Dr. Abrams. It was one of Hoppy's last lectures on the effects of low levels of ionizing radiation, just 3 years before he died at the age of 95. Please watch this, because the genius of it is that in just 23 minutes, Hoppy clearly explains incontrovertibly all you need to know about the topic, and it is this: there is no known safe level of exposure to so-called low-level ionizing radiation. This is from a guy who knows better than just about anybody, anyone in this room, me included, what radiation does to human beings. Forget about safe, allowable levels of exposure. There is no such thing. Finally, parties motivated by profit will try, whenever
30
possible, oh good, I'll actually finish, to ignore this for the sake of their bottom line. A close look at almost every single nuclear incident will bear this out. This story from the workers at Holtec bears it out. We need eternal vigilance to stop these incidents from happening in the first place, and we cannot count on the industry to do this. I'm going to end with a quote from Hoppy's almost last lecture. Life is not one damn thing after another. It is the same damn thing over and over and over again. It is our job to see that this decommissioning of this plant for these workers is not one of those damn things.
Thank you. Ms. DiCrescenzo?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I actually would like to applaud every single public speaker tonight. I think everything that people said was so relevant and so purposeful and full of meaning and care and concern for our fellow human beings, for our environment, and for the Hudson River. And I'm really suspicious of this new water re-permitting kind of thing for anything that comes to be on the site. That has me very, very, very concerned. I would think that, first of all, I don't know what Holtec is packaging and transporting to different places. I'd like to know if their packaging is really safe and secure, what their transportation routes are, what types of vehicles and equipment is being used for that, and do the towns and villages know when those things are coming through? And what preparations are made in case there is some sort of horrible accident? That's one of the things. I want to know if they're transporting them someplace, is it with the permission of the people where it's being transported to? And I'd like to know if it is being transported and reused somewhere else for something else, are they getting paid for it just like they pay themselves for their thin-walled, cheap, practically disposable casks that are used for the spent fuel rods? So there are a number of things that lead me to believe over and over and over again, this is a pattern that Holtec indulges in and engages in on a daily basis. Their corporate greed is phenomenal. It is just outrageous. It is egregious. It causes such harm. And I would think if they're hoping for a data center to come in and use their grounds, that data center would have to supply their own energy needs via solar panel fields or wind farms or something that would not harm the environment and not need the kind of energy that is being proposed, this 200 megawatts. So I think that there was just so much here that I learned about tonight, on top of all the other things that I've learned through the years on this project, and it's really cause for grave concern, and I'm afraid. And I think that Holtec is a criminal company. I think they indulge in criminal behavior, and for some reason they get away with it, and I just do not think they should be allowed to get away with it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight, and I will be looking forward to putting comments in through the usual channels, I guess. So thank you so much, especially. Thank you.
Thanks to our speakers. As a reminder, and if we could pull this up on the screen, there are other ways to comment, and they're available on our website, but as you can see on your screen here, there's always an opportunity to comment, even if you're not able to at one of our meetings. With that, also a reminder about our website, plenty of information on there. Anything else further, Tom?
There's nothing further, although if you go back a slide, I do want people to take full advantage of the website. There's a wealth of information there, including all of our past answers to the questions asked at public statement hearings like these. And we will endeavor to answer the questions posed tonight as well before our next meeting, which will be in the spring, date to be determined. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.